Tonight we slip quietly into the flickering candlelight of Regency England, where shadows dance along the walls of damp townhouses. You find yourself tiptoeing into the life of a girl destined to wrestle with both poetry and numbers. The story begins in December of 1815, with the shriek of a newborn in a London winter that is damp enough to seep right into your bones. Her name is Augusta Ada Byron, though you'll know her later by another title. For now, all you can do is listen as icy winds rattle the panes and carriages clatter past on cobblestones slick with rain. Her father is none other than the notorious poet Lord Byron, a man whose reputation in polite society is half literary brilliance and half tabloid scandal. He's the type of celebrity who would definitely trend on Twitter today for all the wrong reasons. Her mother, Annabella Milbank, is Byron's opposite in almost every way: methodical, deeply logical, with a fondness for mathematics so intense that friends nickname her Princess of Parallelograms. Between these two figures, one chaos, one order. Ada's fate seems sealed. You probably won't survive this, honestly, not because the story is dangerous, but because Ada's world is so entangled in drama, frailty, and Victorian prescriptions that even watching it unfold makes you want to lie down with a cup of herbal tea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story begins with a household divided. Lord Byron, true to form, cannot bear the tedium of domestic life, and within weeks of Ada's birth he abandons his wife and infant daughter, fleeing England under scandalous clouds. You watch Annabella cradle her baby, already convinced she must protect Ada from her father's madness, by steering the girl towards strict logic, away from dangerous poetry. Historians still argue whether Annabella was wise or cruel in this decision, whether denying Ada her father's artistic inheritance was a safeguard or a theft. As Ada coos in her cradle, you can sense the storm that will shape her, the absence of her father leaving a shadow, the weight of her mother's ambition pressing down. It's almost comical. If you think about it, most babies are worried about when their next feeding is coming, and Ada is already locked in a battle of intellectual destiny between math and verse. In those early months, the household whispers about her father's scandals, incest rumors, debts, lovers, duels, and you, standing in the nursery doorway, realize this child will never escape his ghost. Even though she will never meet him again, Byron's presence lingers like smoke on the curtains. London itself seems to fold around Ada's beginning. Crowded drawing rooms where women in heavy gowns gossip, men in cravats argue politics, and outside the soot-filled air mixes with horse dung so thick you swear you can taste it. A quirky detail: wealthy households like hers often hired night soil men to cart away waste by lantern light, and you imagine a tiny Ada dozing peacefully upstairs while strangers shovel muck below. Romantic beginnings, right? But even amid this grit and gossip, you can sense Ada's spark. While her father scribbles verses across Europe and her mother drills tutors in mathematics, the child grows under a roof humming with contradictions. She is Byron's daughter, but also Annabella's experiment. You almost want to lean in and whisper to her swaddled form, "Hold on, little one, your equations and visions will echo centuries ahead, far beyond these narrow streets and bitter separations." You shuffle forward a few years, and the nursery becomes a memory of lace curtains, rattles, and hushed disputes. Ada is now a child walking through cavernous rooms that feel too large for one small figure. Her father, the famous Lord Byron, is gone. He dies in Greece when she is only 8, though his absence has been echoing since the moment he left England. You glance toward the mantelpiece. His portrait stares down like a ghostly roommate, eyes heavy with scandal. You almost expect him to wink, but no, he's just oil paint and regret. Annabella, Ada's mother, watches closely, determined that her daughter will not inherit what she calls the dangerous imagination of the Byrons. You can practically hear her tapping a ruler on the table, saying, "Logic, Ada, logic, while tutors arrive carrying heavy books of mathematics and moral philosophy. Annabella insists Ada study numbers, structure, discipline, poetry, music. Those are suspect, though, ironically, Ada will later use both imagination and mathematics to dream up ideas far stranger than any stanza her father ever wrote. Still, Ada's childhood is lonely. You watch her sit at a desk too large for her, scratching numbers in chalk while outside children laugh in gardens. She suffers from bouts of illness, fevers, headaches, even temporary paralysis at one point, and so the world shrinks to lessons and recovery. Historians still argue whether Annabella's strict regimen was protective or suffocating. Was Ada's mind sharpened by the pressure, or stifled by it? That debate trails you like a cough in a Victorian sickroom. Here's the quirky tidbit. Annabella hires a phrenologist once, a so-called scientist who examines bumps on Ada's skull to predict her temperament. Imagine some serious-looking man leaning over little Ada's head, muttering about a strong organ of calculation. Yes, this was cutting-edge pseudoscience at the time, the 19th century version of checking your star sign to see if you'll do well on a math test. And Ada, she absorbs it all with a strange resilience. You see her trying to blend obedience with her own secret spark. She devours geometry, delights in patterns, and yet sketches little fantastical designs of flying machines with feathered wings. Even as a child, she's sneaking imagination through the cracks her mother tried to seal. On evenings when the house grows quiet, you sense Ada tiptoeing in her mind toward her absent father. What did he sound like when he laughed? Did he ever imagine her? And then, the practical lessons crash back down, her mother pulling her toward numbers again. You almost want to hand her a stuffed toy and say, "Don't worry, Ada, one day the world will finally read your homework and call it visionary." London society, meanwhile, buzzes on. Annabella drags Ada into drawing rooms where adults sip tea and gossip about scandals, oblivious to the child in the corner memorizing patterns in the rug. She is, in truth, both fragile and formidable, a girl whose loneliness feeds a hunger for knowledge. You can picture her nose pressed to a frosty window, watching carriages pass, dreaming of machines that might carry her far beyond. And through it all, the ghost of Byron lingers, haunting her without ever touching her. His absence is almost louder than his presence could have been. You lean in closer, and you can almost hear Ada whispering in her sleep, "I'll show you, Father. I'll build something you could never have imagined." You're back in Ada's childhood chamber, the air smelling faintly of ink and coal smoke, and you watch her tilt her head over a sketchbook. At first you think she's doodling flowers like any ordinary girl of her time, but no, those lines curve into wings, gears, and strings. She is inventing things. Ada is barely 13 when she begins designing contraptions that look suspiciously like early airplanes, even though humans won't actually leave the ground with machines for another 80 years. She calls her projects flyology, and you picture her holding up feathers to the light, trying to see what mathematics might hide in the delicate symmetry. Her tutors try to keep her focused on Euclid and algebra, but Ada slips sideways, fusing imagination with calculation. She draws diagrams of winged machines, labeling the mechanics in the same careful hand she uses for arithmetic. You lean over her shoulder, watching her try to calculate lift centuries before the Wright brothers. She's already dreaming. Historians still argue whether Ada was serious about this flyology or simply indulging in youthful fancy. Either way, it shows a restless mind refusing to color inside the lines. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ada once imagined a steam-powered flying horse, complete with an internal engine. Yes, picture that for a moment, a mechanical Pegasus puffing along over Hyde Park, alarming pedestrians and likely terrifying real horses. Victorian imagination could be as wild as any sci-fi movie trailer today. Yet, beneath the fancy, there's strain. Ada's health never fully cooperates, her legs ache, her lungs weaken, and her mother's strict oversight remains constant. Annabella insists that Ada's sketches must always be grounded in rules and proofs, lest poetic madness creep in. You sigh, watching Ada hide her notebook under a stack of geometry exercises, as though her imagination is something shameful. But you can't help noticing. This tension between logic and imagination is exactly what gives her mind its brilliance. She is not just a mathematician in training, not just a dreamer sketching wings. She is both, at once. Picture her pacing the room on a rainy afternoon, tapping her quill against her palm, eyes darting with curiosity. Outside, the city churns with carts and shouting vendors. Inside, Ada is rehearsing questions no one has asked her to solve. How do numbers relate to nature? Could machines mimic thought? Could something mechanical someday perform music? She doesn't have the answers yet, but the questions sparkle like embers waiting for oxygen. One night, candles guttering low, Ada presses her nose to the window pane, fogging the glass. She imagines herself not in this silent townhouse but soaring above London on her winged machine, coal smoke rising below, bells ringing faintly from St. Paul's. You almost want to whisper through the glass, hold on to that vision. The future will call it prophecy. And so Ada's childhood dreams, though hidden, carve out a secret map of where she's headed. Not toward poetry alone, not toward numbers alone, but toward a strange intersection the world has yet to name. You slip further along Ada's path, the sketches of winged horses now tucked away as the stern machinery of education takes over. The year is 1831, and Ada is 16, with tutors bustling in and out of her rooms like actors in a long-running play. You imagine the air heavy with chalk dust, the tables crowded with thick volumes, Euclid's Elements, algebraic treatises, even the first whispers of calculus. It's not the kind of homework you'd wish on anyone, yet Ada leans into it, as though solving for X might also solve the puzzle of her own restless mind. One teacher in particular, Mary Somerville, becomes her intellectual compass. Somerville is no ordinary tutor but a celebrated mathematician and translator, one of the rare women welcomed into scientific circles. Picture the scene. Ada sits straight-backed, quill poised, as Somerville unpacks the mysteries of algebra and astronomy, her Scottish accent cutting through the London haze. You, listening in the corner, almost want to applaud, because in a world where women are often told their brains are too delicate for math, here is a mentor showing Ada otherwise. Still, Ada's health falters. She suffers from bouts of measles, headaches, and a strange weakness in her limbs that sometimes forces her into confinement for months. The doctors prescribe rest, leeches, and opium tinctures, because of course they do. Quirky tidbit. One physician even suggested mild horseback riding as a cure, a prescription that sounds more like a 19th century wellness retreat than medical science. Through it all, Ada clings to her notebooks. While other young ladies of her rank are practicing pianoforte trills or rehearsing curtsies, Ada is diving into integrals and imagining how numbers might describe the hidden architecture of the world. Historians still argue whether her genius was innate or cultivated. Was she destined to think this way, or did Annabella's iron-fisted regimen force her into brilliance? You picture a dreary afternoon, rain streaks the windows, Ada lies pale in bed, yet she props open a geometry text and whispers proofs under her breath like lullabies. She is determined, even in weakness, to keep moving through theorems. It's oddly comforting. You almost wish you could bring her a hot water bottle and a blanket with Wi-Fi, but alas, she's stuck with candles and cough syrup laced with laudanum. And here is the quiet miracle. Ada begins to see math not just as numbers but as a language, one that can capture both logic and imagination. To her, equations aren't cages, they're wings, more reliable than the feathered machines she once sketched. In those long, feverish nights, she discovers what will become the rhythm of her life. Imagination powered by calculation, calculation lit by imagination. You walk with Ada now into her late teens, and the rooms around her feel less like sick rooms and more like salons, bright, crowded, buzzing with ideas. The year is 1833 when she's introduced to a man who will alter the entire trajectory of her life, Charles Babbage. You're at a fashionable London gathering, chandeliers glittering, guests murmuring about politics and poetry, and suddenly there it is, a strange contraption on display, polished brass gears and finely cut levers gleaming in the candlelight. This is the difference engine, Babbage's mechanical calculator, designed to solve mathematical tables with absolute precision. Most people glance at it politely, then turn back to their champagne. But you notice Ada. Her eyes widen, her breath catches, she is transfixed. Where others see cogs and crankshafts, she sees possibility. Babbage himself notices her curiosity. He's in his early 40s, eccentric and brilliant, with a tendency to insult street musicians and complain about government funding. Yet when he speaks of his machine, he lights up like a furnace. You watch Ada lean closer, asking pointed questions about how the gears interlock, how the calculations unfold step by step. Babbage, astonished, whispers later that she is an enchantress of numbers. The nickname sticks, though at this moment it is only the first spark of their collaboration. Quirky tidbit, Babbage was notorious for organizing soirees where he'd showcase his engines to London's elite, sometimes even inviting royalty. Guests often left bewildered, muttering that it was all too complicated. But Ada, she returns again and again, almost hypnotized, sketching diagrams in her notebooks long after the party's end. Historians still argue whether Ada truly grasped the inner mechanics of Babbage's designs at this stage, or if her brilliance would blossom only later through study and translation. But standing here in the noise of clinking glasses and gossip, you can feel the charge between them, an intellectual recognition, a meeting of minds across age and gender, like two musicians who instantly hear the same hidden melody. Imagine Ada walking home that night, the London fog pressing down, her breath visible in the cold air. She is thinking not of gowns or suitors but of gears turning, numbers flowing, possibilities humming in brass and steel. You almost want to nudge her gently and say, "Remember this moment, it's the doorway to everything." And so the scene closes, Babbage with his unfinished engine, Ada with her untested genius. Together, they've lit the first flame of a story that will outlast them both. The gears from that first meeting keep turning in Ada's mind, and soon she is no longer a spectator but a participant in Babbage's great obsession. You imagine her seated at a polished desk, letters scattered, diagrams half finished, while outside the foghorns of London groan across the Thames. She is in her early 20s now, her hair pinned up in the latest style, but her true adornments are notebooks filled with equations and sketches. Babbage continues refining his dream, shifting from the difference engine to an even more ambitious project, the Analytical Engine. Where the difference engine can crunch numbers in fixed routines, the Analytical Engine promises something closer to a universal machine. It will have a mill, like a modern CPU, a store, like memory, and punch cards for instructions. It sounds suspiciously like the ancestor of your laptop humming beside you tonight. Ada takes to this with startling speed. She doesn't merely copy Babbage's enthusiasm, she refracts it through her own imagination. You watch her translate foreign works on the engine into English, but not passively, she adds her own extensive notes, longer than the original paper itself. These notes shimmer with originality, filled with insights about how such a machine might someday extend beyond calculation into realms of music, art, and thought. Quirky tidbit, Babbage, for all his genius, often struggled to explain himself clearly. His lectures could lose audiences halfway through. Ada, however, had a talent for translation not just from French to English, but from abstract mechanics to language people could understand. She was, in effect, his public relations department wrapped in lace and intelligence. Still, you notice the skepticism in the air. Many in Victorian society treat her contributions as assistances, as though she were merely a talented secretary polishing the great man's drafts. Historians still argue whether Ada was a true co-creator or an inspired commentator, though modern scholars increasingly credit her with visionary leaps beyond Babbage's own scope. Babbage himself is not shy about praising her. He writes of her soul of the musician combined with the head of a mathematician. Imagine him, wild-haired and intense, calling her the enchantress of numbers, while Ada rolls her eyes just slightly at the theatrical nickname but secretly treasures it. Picture an evening in her study. Ada leans over sheets of paper, candlelight flickering, children asleep upstairs, while she drafts a passage predicting that machines could manipulate symbols in patterns beyond arithmetic. Outside, the city is loud with carriages, but inside, the quiet scratch of her quill sounds suspiciously like the ticking of a future computer. You, standing at her elbow, realize she's beginning to write not just about engines, but about the architecture of thought itself. You lean closer now, because Ada's pen is moving quickly, faster than the ink can dry, and this is the moment her thoughts crystallize into something uncanny. She is working on her translation of Luigi Federico Menebria's paper about Babbage's Analytical Engine. It begins as a straightforward commission: translate the French into English. But Ada doesn't stop there, she expands it into a monumental document, tripling the length with her own annotations. These are the famous notes, labeled A through G, and they are where her voice takes flight. Note G in particular makes you pause. In it, Ada explains how the analytical engine could be instructed to calculate Bernoulli numbers, an example so detailed it reads like the world's first computer program. She doesn't call it that, of course, but you can feel the blueprint of modern coding hidden in the instructions. Step by step, she shows how the engine might loop through sequences, breaking down complexity into simple operations. Here's the quirky tidbit. Ada describes the engine as weaving algebraic patterns the way a jackwood loom weaves flowers and vines into silk. Imagine her holding a swatch of brocade, comparing the intricate threads to the punch cards that would direct Babbage's machine. It's a metaphor so vivid that even someone half asleep at one of those stuffy Victorian lectures could suddenly picture what she meant. And then comes the leap that still echoes today. Ada insists the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music. You blink at the page, rereading, because this is 1843 and no one else is saying anything like this. She is, in essence, predicting algorithmic art, computer-generated music, even artificial intelligence. Historians still argue whether she was speculating wildly or whether she glimpsed, with eerie accuracy, the outlines of the digital age. Picture her in her study, surrounded by books and children's toys scattered on the floor. She's thin, pale, often exhausted, but her mind glows. She scratches out the words, dips her quill, scratches more. Somewhere in the distance, a piano plays, and she wonders if one day, a machine might play not just the notes it's told, but new melodies of its own. You almost want to lean in and whisper, Ada, they will name a programming language after you. They'll argue about your notes for centuries. And you're only 27. But of course, she cannot hear you. She only hears the ticking of her clock, the hiss of her lamp, and the quiet thrill of possibility racing ahead of her time. The ink from Ada's famous notes has barely dried when the murmurs begin to swirl. You step with her into the drawing rooms of Victorian society, where the clink of teacups competes with the rustle of gossip. Ada, despite her brilliance, is still a woman in the 1840s, and you feel the skepticism in every arched eyebrow. Gentlemen nod politely, but behind their mustache you can almost hear it. Surely she's just Babbage's mouthpiece. Ada doesn't let it go unchallenged. She strides into salons, her dress rustling, her voice calm but insistent, ready to discuss the analytical engine with anyone willing to keep up. Yet you notice how quickly the conversation pivots, men steered into the serious talk with Babbage, women herded back toward fashion and family. The dissonance is enough to make you want to shake the whole parlor and shout, "She wrote the program, folks." Quirky tidbit. One journalist, half amused and half condescending, wrote that Ada was poetical in her mathematics. He thought he was being clever, but you can almost hear Ada snort at the phrase, privately pleased that her reputation was too complicated for them to file neatly under lady with embroidery hoop. Historians still argue whether Ada exaggerated her role or whether her critics deliberately diminished her. Did she overstate the engine's potential, or did the men around her fear her vision? Either way, she was caught in that liminal Victorian place, too unconventional to be ignored, too female to be fully acknowledged. You picture one evening in particular. Ada stands by the fireplace, embers glowing, while a group of men debate whether women can truly handle mathematics. One sneers about female nerves, another smirks that intellect in women is unbecoming. Ada listens, chin lifted, then cuts in sharply with a question about their latest algebraic methods. The men stumble, their confidence wavering. You stifle a laugh because in that moment, she dismantles their prejudice with the elegance of an equation. And yet, society's whispers follow her. She's called eccentric, even unstable, her imagination deemed dangerous. Her mother's old fears resurface. Was Ada slipping into the same madness that haunted Lord Byron? But you, watching her hold her ground, see something else. Not madness, but defiance, sharpened by logic and lit by imagination. It's exhausting, though. After nights of wrangling with prejudice and translation notes, Ada retreats home, curls into a chair, and stares at the flames. You can almost hear her murmur, "One day, the world will understand." And you, standing nearby, believe her. You walk beside Ada now as her life takes on a new shape, one not only of numbers and engines but of marriage and family. It's 1835 when she weds William King, a man of steady wealth and respectable title. Picture the ceremony: candlelit church, polished shoes squeaking on stone, Ada in satin, her veil trembling with each nervous breath. She is 19, still so young, and yet stepping into a role that Victorian society expects of her with heavy certainty. William is no Lord Byron, thank goodness. He is practical, somewhat reserved, and more inclined toward estate management than poetry. Yet he respects Ada's mind, enough to tolerate evenings when she rattles on about mathematics long past midnight. When he becomes Earl of Lovelace in 1838, Ada gains her lifelong title, Countess of Lovelace. You roll it on your tongue like a piece of sugared fruit, Ada Lovelace. It feels official, like she has been knighted by history itself. The marriage brings children, 3 in all, born in quick succession. You picture Ada with a baby in one arm and a geometry text in the other, rocking the cradle with her foot while muttering proofs aloud. Domestic life is no small challenge: illnesses, nursing, the endless clamor of staff and estate duties. Yet even with diapers and dinner parties, her notebooks never gather dust. Her letters to Babbage continue, her calculations stretch late into the night. Here's the quirky tidbit: Ada once described her mind as a flying bird, darting from mathematics to music to machinery, sometimes so restless she couldn't sleep. Imagine William trying to host a polite dinner while Ada interrupts with, "Darling, do you realize an engine could potentially weave patterns of sound?" The guests blink, forkfuls of pudding frozen mid-air. Historians still argue whether Ada's marriage enabled her pursuits or quietly restricted them. Was William a supportive partner who gave her freedom, or a dutiful Victorian husband who tolerated her eccentricities? The truth may lie in between. He was steady enough to provide a platform, yet cautious enough never to join her flights of speculation. On quiet evenings at their Ockham estate, Ada walks the gardens, her dress brushing damp grass, stars wheeling above. She is countess now, mother now, but still the enchantress of numbers. You can almost hear her whisper to the night air, "I am more than any title. I am building something unseen." And you, drifting beside her in the dark, know she's right. You find Ada again in the dim corridors of her estate, candles guttering against the drafts, her footsteps slower than before. The years of strain have taken their toll. Migraines, fevers, stomach pains that never quite fade. Sometimes she's bedridden for weeks, her children peeking nervously into her room, William hovering in the doorway unsure whether to call the doctor again. You can almost feel the chill of those damp sheets, the faint metallic smell of Victorian medicine cabinets. The prescriptions come in little glass bottles, their labels promising relief but hiding danger. Laudanum, opium tinctures, mercury compounds, all dispensed with cheerful confidence by doctors who really have no idea what's happening inside her body. Ada drinks, swallows, grimaces, and waits. The pain ebbs, then returns, sometimes fiercer than before. Quirky tidbit: one physician even suggested she try mesmerism, yes, hypnotic passes of the hands, the 19th century equivalent of have you tried turning it off and on again? Yet, astonishingly, Ada keeps working. You picture her propped up in bed, ink stains on her sheets, diagrams spread across her lap. Her hand trembles from exhaustion, but her pen scratches anyway, each line a rebellion against frailty. She writes to friends about mathematical music, she drafts new speculations about symbolic logic, she asks Babbage pointed questions. For every ounce her body fails, her mind seems to burn twice as brightly. Historians still argue whether Ada's declining health limited her intellectual output or actually sharpened it. Did the nearness of pain push her to see patterns others missed? Or did illness rob her of the decades she might have spent building on her notes? The debate lingers like a draft in the hall. There are nights when she sinks into the pillows, pupils dilated from opium, whispering half-coherent visions of machines that could mimic thought. You lean closer, half-chilled, half-dazzled, because even through fever she's still imagining futures the world cannot yet conceive. The house falls quiet except for the ticking of a long case clock in the hall, each chime like a reminder of time's theft. Ada lies pale but unbowed, muttering that she refuses to let her bird-like mind be caged by weakness. You watch her close her eyes, and in the darkness, you sense her still calculating, turning over numbers, ideas, prophesies, long after the candles have died. You shift the scene now to something unexpected: green felt tables, the shuffle of cards, the quiet clink of coins. Yes, Ada Lovelace, the celebrated mathematician, has a secret passion: gambling. Not in the reckless, Byron-esque lose-it-all-on-a-whim sense, but in the analytical, scheming way only an enchantress of numbers could attempt. She doesn't just play, she tries to beat the system with mathematics. It begins with horse racing. You picture her hunched over racing forms, pencil in hand, scribbling equations, convinced she can model the probabilities of winners and losers. She gathers a small group of aristocratic friends, fellow enthusiasts who whisper like co-conspirators around the fire. Ada tries to design formulas, schemes, as she calls them, to ensure consistent wins. You almost want to tap her shoulder and say, "Ada, this isn't exactly the analytical engine, it's just Mr. Darcy's pony trotting in circles." Quirky tidbit: her schemes grew so elaborate that at one point she borrowed money from friends and even pawned some jewelry to cover debts. Imagine the Countess of Lovelace sneaking to a pawnbroker with a shawl wrapped tight, bargaining over a bracelet so she can fund another mathematical system for betting. It's both brilliant and a little tragic. Historians still argue whether these gambling experiments were signs of genius misapplied or symptoms of desperation. Was Ada exploring applied probability ahead of her time, or was she simply chasing quick fortune while her health declined? The line between innovation and folly blurs here, as it often does in her life. Picture one smoky evening, Ada sits with friends at a gaming table, her face pale but her eyes sharp, calculating odds as dice tumble. She believes, truly, that numbers will protect her, that with enough equations she can outwit chance itself. But the universe, as you know, doesn't always cooperate. Losses mount, debts tighten, and Ada's household begins to feel the strain. And yet, You can't help but admire the stubborn audacity. Even in risk, she treats life as an experiment, always pushing, always testing. You imagine her whispering to herself, "There must be a pattern here." And you, sitting beside her at that dimly lit table, realize that Ada's curse and gift are the same. She cannot stop seeking order in chaos, even when chaos holds all the cards. You're back at Ada's writing desk, but this time the papers in front of her are not horse racing odds, they're letters, careful and desperate, penned to men she admires in the intellectual world. Ada has always been a correspondent, using ink and parchment like lifelines tossed into the sea of Victorian society. Now, as her body falters and her gambling misadventures weigh on her, these letters take on a sharper edge. She writes to Babbage, as always, trying to keep his attention on the Analytical Engine. Sometimes she scolds him for being too theatrical, too unwilling to compromise. Other times, she begs him to let her take the reins of publication and publicity. "My brain," she tells him, "is something more than merely mortal." And you picture her smiling faintly after writing that line, knowing it's a cheeky boast but also a truth she feels in her bones. Then there's Augustus de Morgan, her patient mathematics tutor. Ada peppers him with questions about symbolic logic, about infinity, about whether algebra could capture not just numbers but ideas themselves. One mainstream fact: her letters to De Morgan reveal an early, instinctive grasp of what we now call computer science, the manipulation of symbols beyond arithmetic. It's there, hiding between the lines, like faint music only future generations would recognize. Quirky tidbit: in one exchange, she apologizes for the chaotic handwriting caused by her migraines, joking that her pen seems to have a mind of its own. You almost hear her laughing through the ink stains, self-deprecating but unwilling to stop. Historians still argue whether these correspondences represent genuine breakthroughs or simply brilliant speculation that never found firm ground. Some say Ada glimpsed the dawn of a new intellectual age, others argue she was only daydreaming, extrapolating wildly from Babbage's half-built machine. What's certain is that her letters became her final battlefield. She wrote fiercely, trying to pin down truths before time ran out. Picture her bent low over the desk, candlelight carving deep shadows in her face, every stroke of the quill an act of defiance. Even as her health crumbled, Ada poured herself onto paper, convinced that somewhere in the mess of ink and pain lay a future that only she could see. You find yourself in Ada's bedroom again, but this time the atmosphere has changed. The once busy writing desk is quieter, letters left unanswered, mathematical notes unfinished. The air is heavy with sickness. Ada is only in her mid-30s, far too young, but her body is betraying her rapidly. The pain that began as vague discomfort has sharpened into something merciless: uterine cancer, though Victorian doctors wouldn't have named it precisely. She spends long hours in bed now, curtains drawn to block the harsh daylight. The room smells faintly of camphor, opium, and the faint sweetness of wilting flowers left by visitors. Her mother, Annabella, is back at her side, managing her care with a mixture of severity and devotion. It's ironic, you remember that cold, mathematical disciplinarian from Ada's childhood, and here she is again, holding vigil at the end. A mainstream fact: Ada suffered so intensely that she became dependent on opiate-based medicines. Laudanum dulled the edges, but never fully. Doctors applied bleeding, poultices, and even leeches, grasping at old remedies that probably did more harm than good. Quirky tidbit: one rumor claims a mesmerist was once brought in, sweeping hands dramatically over Ada's fevered body, as if suggestion alone could ease cancer's grip. Historians still argue whether her declining health silenced her genius prematurely or whether her most important contributions had already been made. Would more decades have cemented her as the mother of computer science, or was she destined always to be a tantalizing what-if? Ada herself seemed torn between despair and flashes of fierce humor. On one occasion, weak and pale, She supposedly quipped that her brain would keep running even if the rest of her refused to. You imagine her whispering that line with a crooked grin, defying her fate in the only way she knew, through wit and intellect. The nights grow quieter. William stays near, children kept at a distance to spare them the worst of the decline. Every tick of the clock feels louder, every candle burning lower, every hour stretching long. You watch Ada slip in and out of restless sleep, murmuring about numbers, engines, patterns. Even in suffering, her thoughts remain tethered to the future, as if she refuses to surrender entirely to the present. And you, sitting at her bedside, feel the weight of inevitability settling in, the slow march of time pressing down, whispering that even the brightest flame flickers. The house falls into a hush, the kind of quiet you only notice once all the clocks have ticked in unison and every servant has withdrawn to the edges of the hall. Ada lies pale beneath heavy quilts, her once restless hands folded loosely on her chest. She is just 36. The opiates have dulled her pain, but not the gravity of what's coming. In her final weeks, Ada makes one request that startles everyone. She wants to be buried beside her father, Lord Byron. The poet she never met, the man whose scandalous shadow had shaped her life, suddenly becomes her chosen companion in death. You picture Annabella blanching at the demand, the mother who spent decades trying to purge Ada of Byron's influence now forced to honor it. Still, Ada insists. A mainstream fact, Ada Lovelace died on November 27, 1852. In Hucknall, Nottinghamshire, she was laid to rest in the Byron family vault, right next to the bones of the father who had left England when she was only a few weeks old. Quirky tidbit. Locals whispered that Byron's ghost might have stirred in surprise at this unexpected reunion, mathematician daughter joining libertine poet for eternity, an odd family portrait etched in stone. Historians still argue whether this choice was an act of reconciliation or rebellion. Did Ada long for a connection with the father she never knew, or was she making one last sardonic gesture against her mother's lifelong warnings? The answer lingers, unresolved, like so much else in her brief, dazzling story. Picture the funeral, a grey English sky, damp earth clinging to boots, the sound of shovels against stone. The Byron vault opens, its cold breath spilling into the air, and Ada is carried down into that silent chamber. The world above her continues, trains chugging, factories humming, scholars debating, but inside that vault, two restless Byrons finally share the same stillness. You lean back, absorbing the finality. The enchantress of numbers is gone, yet somehow her absence feels temporary, as though the tick of every modern computer is just another echo of her unfinished sentences. The years roll forward without you noticing, and suddenly you're standing decades past Ada's burial, watching how the world either forgets or half remembers her. For a long time, her name barely lingers outside private circles. Babbage dies with his machine unbuilt, his reputation tarnished. Ada's notes gather dust on shelves, her brilliance sleeping inside volumes only a handful of mathematicians ever touch. But the future has a strange way of listening. In the 20th century, as engineers begin to tinker with real computers, Ada's voice drifts back. Scholars stumble across her writings and pause, blinking at the clarity with which she'd glimpsed what machines might do. Suddenly, the enchantress of numbers becomes not just a Victorian curiosity but a prophet. A mainstream fact, in 1980, the US Department of Defense named a programming language Ada in her honor. Picture it, lines of digital code humming inside circuits, each command bearing the ghost of her vision. A Victorian countess, reappearing in the syntax of modern machines. Quirky tidbit, there's even an annual Ada Lovelace Day, celebrated every October to honor women in STEM. You can imagine her raising an eyebrow at that, perhaps muttering, "About time." Historians still argue how much of Ada's genius was foresight and how much was embellishment, how much was true understanding and how much was Victorian flair. Yet maybe that debate misses the point. She dared to see beyond gears and cogs, to dream of machines weaving algebra like looms, composing symphonies, processing language. Even if her predictions outpaced her century, they seeded the imagination of ours. You wander through this inheritance, every glowing screen, every coded instruction, every artificial intelligence whispering back to you tonight. Ada's hand hovers invisibly over it all. Her short, stormy life still ripples outward, bridging poetry and logic, Byron and Babbage, mortality and infinity. And so, as you close this journey, you lean into her legacy not as a complete tale, but as an unfinished equation, still running, still unresolved, a program that continues to compile long after the author has gone. Now let your shoulders sink, let the room soften. The story has ended, but the echoes of it drift gently around you, like candle smoke curling upward into the night. You've walked with Ada through drawing rooms and lecture halls, through fevered nights and quiet mornings, and now you're standing in the hush after her story, a space where time stretches long and calm. Notice your breath. Slow, steady, almost like the ticking of that old grandfather clock you kept hearing in her halls. Inhale, exhale. Each cycle a reminder that unlike Ada's frantic race against illness, you have the luxury of resting here, unhurried, without needing to prove anything to anyone. The world outside might be filled with noise engines, devices, the very machines that carry her legacy, but in this moment, you can let them fade into background hum. Imagine them as distant waves, rolling gently, never crashing, just soothing. The light in your room, whether from a lamp or moonlight sneaking through curtains, feels softer now. The air feels warmer, thicker, as if it wants to wrap you up. Every muscle loosens, every thought slows. Ada's story reminds you that brilliance and fragility can exist side by side, that even the sharpest minds need stillness. So you give yourself permission to drift, to let go of calculation, to let go of memory, to simply float. You're safe here, in this pause between waking and sleep, where history folds into dream. Ada rests in her vault, her mind echoing in the machines of today, and you rest here, knowing tomorrow can hold its puzzles without rushing into tonight. Close your eyes. Let the hum carry you. Fade now, gently.